No questions? Okay. One second. I was closed on all these websites. JavaScript. Yeah, so yesterday we were discussing about all the functions, and I'd given assignment to solve, which is basically a very small question to find out the average of all the numbers in the array. So yeah, first let me just run this app. So okay. Yeah, so like I was saying, I'd given a simple question at the end of the class yesterday where I would just like find out the average of all the numbers with me. Like the average of 0 and 50 would be 25. Yeah. And if the array is these many numbers, you get 85.2. Basically, you have to just do a sum of all these numbers and divide by the number of elements within the array. A simple way to write the function is just by doing function and average, and this will receive an array. And let's first of all we need a variable to store the total of all the elements within the array, and we will loop over each number in the array by just doing let num of array. And what we'll do here, we'll just do total plus is equal to the num, and then we divide by the number of numbers, the number of items in the array. And the very simple way to do it is just to total by the array of length. We return this value. And this is how we return the average of all the numbers within the array. So let's just do const result is equal to the average of, let's give it an array. Let's give it like 0, 50. Let's see, we get, we have to do console.log of result. We get 20, which is the correct answer. And if we do this, oh wait, I have not copied this. Let me just copy this and paste it here. And I get 85.2 as the correct answer. So this is how we would write the average of function. Now let's write one more function going for one more function. This will be a little, I mean, nothing again difficult at all, but little tricky. Okay, so I'll write the question and the answer as well, just to show you how just to give you more practice basically. So before we move ahead, first, before I explain the question, let me explain something to you. So there's this thing called pangram. Pangram. What a pangram is basically, pangram is a sentence that contains all the letters of the alphabet, which means A se leke Z tak, whatever alphabets are there, they'll be contained within that sentence. Like for example, if we have the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Basically, this letter, this sentence is a pangram because the sentence contains all the letters of the alphabet. Basically, if you just look at this sentence, right, you have all the letters from A to Z within the sentence. Well, let's see. We have A here, then we have B, then we have C, and then we have D, and then we have E here. Like that, basically, you have all the letters of the alphabet within the sentence. What I want is we have to write a function called isPangram, which takes in the sentence and returns to whether or not that sentence is a pangram. Okay, so basically let's create a function called is pangram, which receives a sentence. Okay, which means we can actually call this is pangram with whatever sentence you want. Let's pass it this sentence. Okay, now this function is supposed to return a true value if this sentence is a pangram, and returns a value of false if the sentence is not a pangram. Basically, if the sentence contains all the letters of the alphabet, then we return it is true, else we return this false. Now, thing is, if you look at this, the sentence can contain both lowercase as well as the capital uppercase letters, right? Which means in order to normalize that, first what we'll do is we'll just say const lowercase sentence dot to lowercase. The reason we're doing this is in case we have some capital letters within this, we'll just make the entire sentence into one simple lowercase sentence, so that our calculation, the logic that we'll be writing next will become much simpler. Okay. Now, next, what I basically want to do is I want to loop through the entire sentence, and I want to basically I want to loop through the entire alphabet, which is I want to loop through A to Z, and I want to check key if does the letter exist within the sentence or not. Even if one of them does not exist in the sentence, then return a value of false, else return true. Okay, so basically I'll have the alphabet here. Let's say const alphabet is equal to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So we have the entire alphabet here. Now my point is I'll just loop through the entire alphabet here, and I'll check if every letter exists in the sentence or not, lowercase sentence or not. Even if one of them does not exist, then I return a value of false, and only if all of them exist, then I'll return a value of true. The simple way of doing that is just do for let or const char of this alphabet. Okay. By the way, you can use the for of loop on strings also. So the for of loop will work on both arrays as well as strings. Okay. And here I'll just do a console.log for now. Let's see what characters we get. And if we go back here, we basically get everything from A to Z. Okay, which means that the for of loop can be used for a string as well. Now, all I have to check is if lowercase not includes of char, which means if this does not include, if the sentence does not include the character, return false. And if you're coming out of the for loop, return true. One important to notice here is that, see, whenever you return anything from a for loop also, you're basically exiting the for loop and the function as well. So what happens here is if your sentence does not contain any of the characters here, then it's going to be we'll be returning a value of false. We loop through every single thing, right? So even if one of the characters is not contained within the lowercase sentence, we return a value of false. And only if the for loop is completed, which means that every letter was included in the sentence, we return a value of true. Let's see what is the result we get back. Const result. And then we do console.log of result. We get true because the sentence contains all the letters of the alphabet. But let's say I remove one of them. If I remove, then I get a value of true again, which is not correct. 1 second.
सर लोअर केस के आगे आपने कुछ एक सिंबल लगा दिया है if के अंदर।
नहीं नहीं, एक्चुअली एक मिनट रुको। द हाँ, दिस इज द करेक्ट वन। सो व्हाट आई बेसिकली वांट टू डू इज, मैं चेक कर रहा हूँ कि अगर लोअर केस does not include the character, then return a value of false. करेक्ट ही है, but I think I've
लोअर
missed the
केस की
logic.
सर, लोअर केस और लोअर केस्ड।
हाँ, लोअर केस है ना भाई, है ना, सेम। this should return true, false. हाँ हाँ, सी ओके, सेव नहीं हुआ था, I'm sorry. हाँ, now when I remove one of the letter here, if you see, when we have the entire sentence, when you have the correct sentence, then we get a value of true because the sentence contains all the letters of the alphabet. लेकिन अगर मैं एक लेटर निकाल देता हूँ यहाँ से, मुझे false आता है यहाँ पर, because क्या होता है कि see, we keep looping through every single one of them, and then when we come across this character called K, okay, when we're looping through them, when we come across the K character, that K does not exist here. That is why we're returning a value of false. What this means is, अगर ये sentence में वो character included नहीं है, then return value of return a value of false. इसलिए मैंने ये not लगाया है. Not का मतलब है कि अगर lower case जो sentence है, अगर उसमें एक character नहीं है, तो मुझे ये false return करना पड़ेगा. लेकिन if you completed the for loop, it means that ये sentence जो है उसमें ये सारे characters है, then we return a value of true here.
Sir, I have a question.
हाँ हाँ, tell me.
Sir, is this something like a strategy that you are every time you just जब आप मतलब ऐसे भी कोई कोड बनाते हैं तब every time you do the opposite thing first, like आप तो ये भी कर सकते थे कि lower case don't includes care फिर return true, but you go for the opposite, means not like not includes.
I'll tell you why I'm doing that. See, I'm doing this strategy because, so let's say कि अगर एक character नहीं निकला है, then we return early from that. Basically, see, what you're saying is also true. There is no, okay, to answer your question more directly, there is no particular like right strategy in this case. This is what I thought of. I went with this. But the thing is, you can't go with, okay, you're saying that I want to go with this, right? You're saying this I should do, right?
Yes, sir.
But if you do
Then
this, the problem is, see, let's say we start from here, okay? We're checking if A exists in this sentence, okay? Then if A exists in this sentence, we're returning true, which means the entire function is done. लेकिन यहाँ पर तो K है ही नहीं ना.
okay.
We have not gone till K itself, so this will be wrong in this case. The strategy should be, we have to check like this only.
Okay.
Basically, हाँ, तो पूरा for loop करने के बाद ही we can return a value of true. Otherwise, we should not return a value of true. Because हमको नहीं पता कि आगे कोई letter है या नहीं है. वो हमको नहीं पता है ना.
Okay, sir, got it.
ठीक है ना? Yeah. So that is about this one. I'm just trying to think if there are any other problems we can solve. ठीक है. We'll do one thing. So actually, I think this much is enough for the functions part. So हमने अभी जो भी किया है हमने अभी तक, we have studied all about the functions का basics of functions. We have learned about how the functions are defined, how the functions are run. We have also learned about how to return values in the function. Now we'll move on to the next topic, which is advanced functions. Let me just open up my notes. 1 second. Okay, so let's talk about some. Now we're going to talk about the advanced functions, right? So what that means is we're going to talk about some bunch of concepts which are very important to further understand how the functions work, and also is that these topics will also be very useful in the interviews also. Okay, so the first topic we'll be talking about is this thing called scope. So we're going to talk about this thing called scope within a function. Basically, scope is a location where a variable is defined. Wait, actually, let me give you an example of this. So let's say I have a function called help me. Let us have a message. It's called I'm on fire. Okay. Okay, now talking about scope, see, when we define a variable within a function, okay, this variable is set to be visible or accessible within this function only. This means that I cannot access this variable outside this function at all. There's no way I can access that. Okay. This variable, whatever this variable is there, I can access this variable only within this function, which means I can do a console.log of message here and it will work. But if I try to, first let me call the function. Okay. But if I try to do a console.log of message here, it will give me undefined, or it'll actually throw an error because it doesn't exist only. Okay. But if you see here, when I call this function, I was able to print out this console log, but I cannot print out the console log of message outside this function, which basically means that whenever you declare a variable within a function, it exists only within that function. I mean, that is the scope of a variable. That is what a scope is mean. That's what the scope basically means. Repeating it, this message is scoped inside this function. It cannot be accessible outside the function. Now, this is called a function scope. Okay. Whenever a variable is only accessible within that function, it's called a function scope. Okay. Now, the thing is, we have three types of variables, right? We have let, we have const, and we also have the old one, which is var. Okay. Now, the thing is, var is a variable type, which has a scope of a function scope. What that means is if I create a var variable, it can be accessed within the function only. Now, let's say if I create an if block, if true, and if I say var one more message, and if I say I am on water, whatever, okay. This one more message, because it's a var variable, this can be accessed throughout the function itself, which means I can do a console.log or one more message here and it'll still work. See, I get I am on water. But still, if you can see, I cannot log in, I cannot access a var variable outside the function. Okay, which means the var variables have a scope of a function scope. Very important. See, this is an if block, right? This is an if block. And like I told in the last class, whenever we have a pair of curly braces, we call it a block. Whenever you have this is a block. We have different types of blocks. We have the if block, we have while, we have if else, we have the for loops. All the for loops and the while and the if, they're all called the blocks because they have a block of code between them. Okay, which means that whenever you have a var variable declared inside a function or inside a block, that var variable is accessible anywhere inside that function only. You cannot access the var variable outside the function. Okay. But on the other hand, if you try to create a let variable, let's say let I Let's say let greeting is equal to hi, I am let. Okay. Now, if I try to do a console.log of greeting here, then I get that hi, I am let here, which means that so far let is behaving the same as var. But let's see what happens if I create a let variable here. Let's say let joke. Ha ha ha. Now, if I try to access the joke variable outside here, outside the block, see, it says joke is not defined, but joke is clearly defined here, no? Which means what is currently happening here is whenever you have a let variable, right? That let variable is scoped to a block itself. Okay. Let variable is always scoped to a block, and that's why we call it a block scope variable. Actually, both let and const are block scoped, whereas a var variable is function scoped. Now remember, even a function is also a block. And that is why if you create a let variable in the function top level here, that will be accessible anywhere inside this function. But if you create a let variable inside a block like this, then this let variable can be accessed inside this block only, which means I have to move this here. Now it will work. See, I got the ha 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 here. Yes. But again, even if it is let const or var, once you've declared it inside a function, it cannot be accessible outside the function. So let's just remove this because this will never work. But the only difference between var and let in terms of the scoping is var variable jo hai, that will be accessible throughout the function even if it is inside a block like this. But a let variable can be accessible only within a block. It can be an if block, it can be a for loop ka block, it can be a while loop ka block, or it can be a function ka block. But a let is much more specific. Let can be accessed only within a block. And observe here, I've created a let variable here in the function block, and I can access it like this. But if you create a let variable inside a block like this, it can be accessible only inside this block. And this applies to both let and const. So both let and const are block scoped variables, whereas a var variable is always a function scoped variable. Okay, now any questions so far, guys? Just put the function scope and block scope.
No, sir.
Okay. And Pranjal, any questions?
I said it, sir.
Sorry. Rajinder, any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, cool. This has been about the scope. So we spoke about the function scope. We spoke about block scope. Now, one very important interview question, which even I ask in my interviews, is what is the difference between the scope of let and var? Let const and var. The answer is very simple. Var is a function scoped variable, which means it's accessible anywhere within the function only. Okay. They can let and const both are block scoped variables. By block, you mean anything that is there between this curly braces, which means it can be an if block, it can be a for loop block, it can be a while loop block as well. Okay. All of those are called blocks. Okay, so this has been about the function scope and block scope. Next topic is this thing called lexical scope. What lexical scope means is, let's say I have a variable here, const user is equal to like this. And if I have a function say hi, and so I'll call the function here. Basically, a function can access the variables that are defined outside of it, which is this. Which means this function will be able to use or access the variables that are defined outside of it, which means because this variable is defined outside this function, This function can have access to this variable. So just do a console.log of user and say user print here, because the function can have access to the variables defined outside of it. So think of it like this. We have the main program here where I've declared this thing. But then I've created a container which is nothing but a function. This is a function. Right now, this function can actually access the variables that are different outside of it, which means whatever variables you declare in this portion, all of them will be accessible within this function. That's how it works. Okay, that is, and this is nothing but a lexical scope. Lexical scope का मतलब है कि whenever you have a variable that's defined outside of function, that variable can be accessed within that function. One more example of this is, let's say I have a function outer. Okay, I'll say const hero is equal to Black Panther, and I'll say function inner. By the way, this is possible, guys. You can create functions within functions. It's totally possible. Okay, you can nest how many ever functions you want. This is the outer function, and the outer function has an inner function. It's totally possible in JavaScript. Inner function will just say const try for help will basically be hero, please save me. And I'll just do, I'll call the outer function. And I'll just do a console.log of try for help. And I have to invoke this function, right? So I'll invoke it here. Okay. Let's first of all see what's happening here. I've defined an outer function where first of all I've declared a variable here, and I've defined one more function within this function. Now this function has a variable called const try for help, where if you see what I'm doing here is this function is trying to access a variable, which is a hero variable that's defined outside of this function. See, this hero variable, is it there inside this function? It's not. The hero variable exists outside this function, inside this function, which means this inner function is trying to access a variable that is there outside of it. Which means this is called lexical scope. Whenever there's a variable that's there outside a function, it can be accessed by the inner function. That's what lexical scope actually means. Okay. And then I've declared this function here, and I'm calling it immediately here. This is called the lexical scoping. Any questions here, guys? Yeah.
Sir, try for help जो variable है वो हम outer function के अंदर अगर console.log करेंगे तो गलत आएगा?
हाँ. So wait, I will get the answer out of you. See, what did I tell you the scope of a const variable was?
Sir, in a block. Sir,
block scope है ना? हाँ, right. So this is a block, right? This is also a block, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Which means that this is accessible only within this now.
Yes, sir.
हाँ, तो इसके बाद accessible नहीं होगा.
Okay.
Because see, again, I'll tell you, this is a const variable, which has a scope of a block scope. This function is also a block, and hence this variable can be accessed only within this function. You cannot access it outside the function at all. But if you look at this const hero, right, this can be accessible anywhere inside this function, including the inner functions. And whenever an inner function accesses a variable that's defined outside of it, that's called a lexical scope.
Okay.
Okay. So any more questions, Pranjal?
No, sir. No.
Okay, cool. Now let's talk about one more thing called function expressions. Next topic is called function expressions. Now basically, what happens is, see, wait, first let me check if I have any specific notes for this. Let's book the whole here. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to, before talking about function expression, I want to talk about lexical scope ka one more example. An example for this, let's say we have a function called outer. This kind of we have a const movie is equal to, let's say, Amadeus. And we have an inner function here. And this one will have one more function called extra inner. Inside this, I'll do a console.log of movie.to lowercase. Let's shift to uppercase actually, to uppercase. Okay. Right now, what I've done, first let me explain what I've done here is I've created a function called outer, where I have one more function instead of it. And this function in turn has one more function. And like I said, it's totally possible in JavaScript to nest the functions within each other. You can have like thousands of functions also nested into one each other. That is also totally possible. Okay. But first, what we'll do is, see, first we have to somehow call this function, right? And this function exists only within this block. And hence, let's call this function by doing extra inner. Like this. Okay, so right now we are calling the extra inner function here, but we are not calling inner function yet. Let's call the inner function here like this. Okay, so now what you're doing is we have an outer function which has a function called inner, which we're calling like this. And when we call the inner function, we enter this block. And this block, we have this function and we have this thing also. We have this calling the function. This means what ultimately happens is, first we call this function, and hence this gets executed. And then this, and okay. So now if I just do an outer call here, let's see what is the flow. But the flow is when you call the outer function, first, this function will be called. Inside this function, we have declared a variable called the movie. And then we go, JavaScript will say, okay, this is a function definition. So, okay. And then you're calling this inner function. Okay. So let me repeat that. When I call the outer function, I am running the code inside the outer function here. And outer function has a variable. That's a function definition. And you're calling the inner function here. Now, when I call the inner function, what happens is I'm executing the code that's there inside the inner function. Okay. Now we enter the inner function. Inner function ke andar kya hai? We have a function definition and we are calling that function. Which means when we call this function, we execute this block of code. And hence we see a console.log of to uppercase. And if you see the point of this is, we have an outer function, we have inner function, we have one more inner function. Which means that whenever you have a variable that's declared outside in the topmost place, it will be accessible anywhere inside the functions. Which means that both the inner function and the external function will be able to access this movie. Let's try to put a console log here. I'll say console.log of inside the inner function. In the function, so I get the movie here. So inside the function also, it's available. So once you declare a variable that's there in the outer function, that variable will be available anywhere inside the nested functions as well. Yeah, that's how the lexical scoping works. All right. Now let's talk about this thing called function expression. But before that, let's talk about a very simple concept called function statement, which is nothing but whatever you have done so far. Like let's say function add x comma y, and then you just return x plus y, x plus y, sorry, x plus y. We return this, okay, and we call the function with whatever variables want. Now this is called a function statement. Okay, whatever we have learned so far regarding functions, we have created all the function statements. The same thing we can actually do using this thing called function expression. Function expression. So I'll just comment this out. The way this works is, see, and also this is something that is there only in a few languages, including JavaScript and Python. What happens is, so let's talk about a simple concept here. Okay, basically in JavaScript and in Python as well, functions are what we call as first-class citizens. Let me tell you, first-class citizens. Okay, so functions in JavaScript are called as a first-class citizens. What this means is, functions in JavaScript and Python, they behave as any other variable, as any other object or a value. Which means that let's say I have an object. Okay, so let's remove all of this. I have an object called, this is my object, user, and like this. This is my object. Okay. Well, the thing is, because this is an object, I can assign it to a variable, right? Like person. This is possible, right? Let's say I have a number. I can assign this also to a variable. Const number is equal to. Let's say I have an array. 1, 2, 3, 4. I can assign this also to a variable. And let's say I have a string. This also can attach to a. This also I can add to a variable. My point is, whenever you have a object, a number, an array, or a string, you can add them to a variable, right? We can do the same thing with functions also. And like I said, guys, it's not possible in every programming language. A lot of them don't even allow it. Like it's not possible in Java, C++, and C, but it is possible in JavaScript and Python, both. Now in JavaScript, like I said, we can actually add a function to a variable. Let's create a function here. Okay, let's say we have a function called function sum. This takes in a comma b, and this does the same thing. This returns to x plus y. But this time what I'll do, instead of just writing a function statement, I will assign it to a variable like this. Const sum is equal to. Let's say const add is equal to. Now when I call this add function, we still get the correct answer. Oh, sorry, this is x and y. And I have to, 1 second, const result is equal to this, and let's do console.log of result. We should get the correct answer. Like I said, so this is a function statement, which if you assign it to a variable like this, which is possible in JavaScript because the functions are first-class citizens, which means the functions behave like any other objects, which means you can actually assign a function to a variable like this. That is why the functions are called the first-class citizens. The first-class citizen ka matlab hai ki the functions behave like any other object, which means you can actually assign a function to a variable as well, like this. Okay, here I'm just assigning a function to a variable, which is definitely possible. After this, the way you call this function would be to use this variable name and not this variable name. You have to, which means this function can be called by using this variable name. But one common thing is we have this thing called anonymous functions, which I think you guys must have already studied in Python. I'm not sure, but an anonymous. First of all, guys, have you learned about lambda functions in Python?
Yes, sir.
So lambda functions are nothing but anonymous functions. So anonymous का मतलब क्या है? Anonymous. Okay, it's an English word which basically means we do not know about this thing, which means there's no name to it. Okay, no name. No name. And just like how we create lambda functions which basically have no name, we can create anonymous function expressions in JavaScript, which means instead of doing this here, let's remove the function name. Because anyway, because we're assigning this function to a variable like this, we can call the function with this variable name, which means this is the function name right now. And this is called anonymous function expression. Let me give more examples. Let's say function greet takes the name, and if you just console.log of name, and if I call the greet function with name, we get the name here. Or we'll just say name. Okay, we get this thing here. But we can do the same thing by using a function expression, which is, let's say, const greet is equal to a function which will be an anonymous function, and I'll just paste this here. We get the same result again. I forgot to give name. Get the same result again. Okay. The only difference between this and this is a function statement. In this case, I'm assigning an anonymous function expression. This is an anonymous function which basically has no name. But because we're assigning it to this variable, we can refer to this function with this name.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Pranjal, any questions?
Sir, what's the benefit of using this?
Benefit, honestly, no benefit as such. There's no benefit. It's just ease of writing. No true. There's no true benefit between this and this for now. There's one. Okay, wait. Actually, one benefit which you will come across in the next topics that I'm going to talk about. Like basically, the benefit will be, okay, let's say, if I'm storing, okay, I'll give an example. Let's say here I have const full age. Now, full age, what it does is it takes in. Wait, actually, let me give a proper example. Okay, so let's say that if I have this age value here, once you assign a value to a variable, what is the biggest advantage? We can reuse this how many more times we want, right? That is the big advantage. See, if you do not store this value inside a variable, we have to keep using the actual value every single time. Like, let's say if you want to, again, in the future, if you want to get const total age, you have to keep doing whatever the age we get, 10 plus 72. Sorry, plus 72. And maybe if you want to do another age, we do 5 plus 72. Why am I doing something? But if you actually have a variable age, what is the advantage? We'll just replace this thing with a variable, which means you're storing this value once in the variable and then reusing that multiple times. Now, just like this, the benefit of the function expression is also the same thing. Benefit is once you have a function assigned to a variable like this, you can use it anywhere and you can pass it anywhere as well. But I just realized that we can do the same thing with this also. So yes, for now, go on.
सर मैं यही बोल रहा था कि पहले भी तो हम फंक्शन नेम को बार-बार यूज कर सकते हैं, रिकॉल कर सकते हैं.
Correct. So I think, see, for now I can't think of a proper benefit for now. But let's see, when we start talking about more advanced topics, maybe I'll remember something. But for now, just think of this as one more way of writing a function.
Okay, sir.
Okay, na? But I'm sure I'll get some benefits on the way. Okay. Now coming back to the point that functions are first-class citizens, what this means is, see, apart from assigning a function to a variable, right, we can even pass the functions. One second. Functions as values. So the first thing about the function, about the first class citizens is the fact that, wait, let me remove this. First is functions as values, which means, like I said already, just like how we can assign numbers and arrays and objects to a variable, right? You can also assign functions to a variables. So let me just create a multiple of them. Let's say we have const subtract is equal to a function which takes an x comma y and it returns x minus y. This is one kind of function. The second thing is, oh, wait, I'm trying to, okay. Forget all that. Let me create 4 kinds of functions now. First, I create a simple function, add x comma y, and I'll just return x plus y. Now I create a function called subtract, which will be a function expression which takes x comma y, returns x minus y. And now I'll create a function called multiply using the normal function statement, function multiply of x comma y again, and just return x into y. And lastly, we'll create a function expression called divide, which will basically be a function which takes an x comma y. And here we return x by y. X by y here. Now, observe that I've intentionally created two normal functions or function statements and the function expressions. But no matter how the function is created, because the functions are first-class citizens, they can be used as values, which means, let's say I'm going to create an array called operations, like this. Now, so far we have stored in different kinds of values within the array, right? We get store a number, you store a string, you store a boolean, you store an object, you store undefined, you store null. Okay, we have stored different kinds of values within the array so far. But like I said, because the functions are also values, which means you can also store functions also here. You can store add, subtract, multiply, and divide as well, which means, see, because all of these are functions, and because in JavaScript the functions are first-class citizens, which means we can use the functions as values. And that is why we're able to add the functions as values here. Okay, let's do a simple thing now. I'll just do a for const func of operations. Okay, I'm looping over every function, and I will store the result of the func of 30 and 5, and I'll just console log the result here. Let's observe what is happening. You guys tell me, in the first iteration, what will this return to us?
The addition.
So what will be the value?
35.
And in the second iteration, what will be the func?
30.
No, second iteration.
35 होगा, 35 plus 5.
No. Before we get the result, tell me what is the func variable in the second iteration?
So 70.
Subtract है ना second iteration में.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So 30 minus 5 होगा ना?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes.
that's why I told you the 30.
30 क्यों होगा?
Oh, sorry, 30 minus 25. Yes, but I was thinking
25 होगा ना.
yes, yes.
So next situation it will be the multiply function,
Yes,
which we're
sir.
calling here 30 into 5 150, and then divide hoga. So let's look at the answer. 35, 25, 150, and 6. We get all these values. The key takeaway from this is, what you have to understand from this is, the functions can be used as values, which means you can add the functions as values to any variable. You can add it to array, you can add object also. Let's add a function to an object now. Let's say कि const thing is equal to, it will be an object where I'll say do something. Now, like, we can add any kind of value to a property. The value can be a number, a string, a boolean. It can be undefined. It can be one array like this. It can be one more array like this, object like this, but it can also be a function. So we'll just assign this add as a value here. Now remember, there's a difference between what we did here and what we're doing here. Okay, the difference is, see, this is wrong, okay, because see, you do not want to call the function. You just want to add the function here as a value itself. So remember, there's a difference between this and this. When you're doing this, you're calling the function. Always remember this. If you have parentheses, you're calling the function. But if you just want to use the function as a value, just do this. Okay? So this is wrong and this is correct, which means right now I can do thing dot something. The something will be nothing but the add function, which means I can pass in x 10 and 9, and I can do console.log of this. And what do I get back, guys?
19.
19.
Sorry, what will I get back? 19.
तो सर अगर हम
हाँ,
सर अगर ऑब्जेक्ट में हम अगर कॉल कर देते हैं ऐड पैरेंथेसिस लगा के उसके अंदर दो आर्गुमेंट्स हम दे देते हैं, उसके बाद console.log thing.
So what happens now? If you do this right, what is happening? I'll tell you. So
तो
this,
नीचे नहीं लगाएंगे ना, वो नीचे कॉल नहीं करेंगे.
I mean, so that will not work now. So thing I'll tell you. See, what you're saying is we'll do this, right?
Yes, sir.
So I'll tell you what will happen in this case. So first of all, do something is a property which will refer to this value. Now add, because we're calling the add function, what happens is we execute this function and then we're returning the value itself, which means the add function call होके ये 10 plus 9 होके उसका return value जो होगा वो इस पे save होगा. This time if you do console.log, what do you think you'll see? 19. But this is not what we want, right? We actually want to do something as a function itself. See, if you want to do something as a value, as a simple value, then do this. But in the future, if you want to use this do something as a method or as a function, then you have to do this. आपको difference आपको समझ में आया है ना?
सर समझ में तो आया, लेकिन सर रिजल्ट तो सेम ही है.
हाँ, रिजल्ट सेम है, लेकिन look at the process. See, in this case, do something is a function. Do something is a function which refers to this entire function itself. Lekin when we do this, what's happening in this case is the add function will return a value to you which will be stored inside this one. If that is what you want, then fine. But what we want is we want to use this as a function itself, right? So depending on the use case, you should think of what you need to do.
Okay.
Don't look at the end result, look at the process here. अभी क्या हुआ कि basically this is similar to this. This is like a normal property. Again, what we did before was basically we assigned a function here. Now this is very similar to adding this like this function x comma y, and this will return to you x comma y or x plus y. Okay. Abhi this and this are exactly the same. ठीक है, तो ये और ये exactly same है, which means I have to call the function here. And this time I get the return value of 90. Okay, so what I'm doing here is, like I said, a function first class citizen. Guys, 1 second, I'll just get my earphones. 1 second. Guys, I'm sorry. Actually, वो Bluetooth headset use कर रहा था, उस पर charging हो गया था, so I just got my wired earphones. So I was saying कि yeah, so because the functions are first class citizens, you can add them as values. हमें difference क्या है कि this do something जो है that is a function itself. Do something बोल के अब एक function रहेगा, which you can call like this. हाँ, तो अभी I'll tell you one more difference between what Pranjal said and what I said here. So let's say if I do this now, if I do this, do something का value हमेशा 19 ही रहेगा, right? This value will always remain 19. We can never change this value because we've already called it once. और जो भी value आया है, we have stored it here. लेकिन if I do this, this time using this dot do something, I can make any other value I want. Same is 20. You can change it to 98 plus 7, maybe 99, whatever. The value changes again. This gives us the flexibility to use do something as a function. Basically, see, this dot do something का मतलब है कि we are calling this function and we are passing in these arguments here. Is it clear, Pranjal?
Yes, sir.
अभी हाँ clear है ना, ठीक है. So that is what yeah, so that is what using the functions as values means. Now the second part about the first class citizens is functions as arguments. Okay, so let's remove all of this again, and let's say I have a function great name, let's say user, and I'll just do console.log of hi and user.name. Hi user.name. Now when I call this greet, let's say I have a function, I have an object here. Let's say const user object will be name hoga Aditya, and I'm going to pass this greet function this user object. Okay, nothing special I've done so far. You guys already know how this works, but the point here is just like जैसा कि हम एक ऑब्जेक्ट पास कर सकते हैं एक फंक्शन को, we can pass a function also as an argument to a function. Let me repeat that. Just like how you can pass an object as an argument to a function, you can pass another function as an argument to a function, which means let's try to do this. I'll give you a simple example.
Sir, can I see the code again, please?
Yeah.
Sir, if I use var instead of const, then
यहाँ पर
yes, sir. Yeah,
no difference at all.
and let
हाँ, let का भी वही होगा ना. So let const and var. In this case, there'll be no difference at all. See, in terms of the scope, the var has a function scope and let and const have a block scope. Like when you are writing in the top level here, so imagine that all of this exists within a main function again. So imagine that you have a function called main, which in turn executes all of this inside of it. Even though we never call this main function ourselves, we never write this function ourselves, JavaScript creates this function behind the scenes, which means that every single time you run a JavaScript code, whatever code you actually write will be inside this main function. But we never write it.
okay, sir.
Okay. Now what we'll do is I'm just trying to find an example. Okay. So what we'll do, we'll talk about the function as arguments now. Let's create a function called call 3 times, and this expects a function as an argument, and all it will do is it will just call the function 3 times like this, which means let's create a function now. Let's say range const range is equal to, sorry, I'm not thought about that yet. So const range is equal to function and console.log. I hate everything. Okay, now I will pass, I'll call this function, and like I told you guys, see, we can pass a function can accept any type of argument, right? Function can accept a number, string, boolean, whatever as an argument, but it can also accept another function as an argument. Okay, which means that the function can be passed as arguments as well, and hence I'll pass this function as an argument to this function. And this time this function gets called 3 different times. Basically what's happening here is, see, this function funka parameter, this refers to this range, and hence we're just calling this range function 3 different times like this. Now let's call this, we'll create one more function called maybe try, and this will do a console.log of I am so sad. I'm so sad. Okay, this time I'll pass this function here. What will happen this time? This func parameter will refer to the cry function, which means this will be the cry again. Cry, and cry. This basically means that a function can accept even another function also as an argument or parameter. And again, never do this. Don't do this, because when you do this essentially means जो भी इसका returned value है वो तुम इसमें डाल रहे हो. Let me give an example. Let's say कि func print something, and this receives something. Let's just say a placeholder. Okay, and it will just do a console.log of this placeholder, which means if I just print maybe 10, you get 10 printed here. If you print an object, वो यहाँ पर print होगा. But let's create a function now. I'll say function hey.
and this will return to you 2. Okay, now if I pass this function just like this, it prints out the function itself, which means this placeholder is nothing but this function. And here, if I want to actually print out the 2 value, what I should just call the function here, and then I get the value of 2 here. But let's say I remove this, and if I instead do that here, what this means is I'm calling the hey function and I'm returning 2 here, and that will be passed as the value to this one, which means this time the placeholder will actually have a value of 2. Okay, now again you might get a question, but in both the cases the answer is same, right? But the point is, what if this function is expecting a function as an argument? Like here, this code is permanent, okay? But if you do this in this case, the error will come because we are returning 2, and 2 ke baad parenthesis makes no sense. That's why you have to return like this. So depending on the use case, depending on what you want to achieve, you have to pass the correct argument. Okay, so that's how the function as arguments works. Now let's write a simple thing. Let's say ki I'll say again function rate console.log. I hate everything. I have this function, and I'll write one more function called repeat n times. Repeat n times. This takes in the action it wants to perform and the number of times. And what we'll do is very simply, we'll just do const let I is equal to 0, I less than num, and I plus plus, which means basically I want to start from 0 and go up to this whatever number I get. And I just want to keep calling this action. And this time I can call the repeat n times with this range as the argument. And I have to pass in number also. Let's pass in some 10 times. This gets printed 10 times. And if I change it to, let's say, 1 time, only 1 time it will get printed. Let's see what's happening here. I'm calling this repeat n functions and passing this range ka function as an argument, which means this action is right now nothing but range. And number is nothing but 1, which means we will only loop once. We'll call the action, which is nothing but this range function, because this action is a parameter which refers to this range function. Again, don't do this, because this will mean that you're returning जो भी values पे return होगा वो तुम pass कर रहे हो उसके अंदर. But you want to pass the actual function itself. Okay, this is what we mean by the functions as arguments. Okay, because this function is an argument to another function. That is why we call them as first class citizens. Any questions here, guys?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Sir, do we have like range function in Python?
No. So range, range is an inbuilt function in Python, right? We do not have that in JavaScript.
Sir,
We have to implement that on our
बात
own.
में confusion आ रहा है.
हाँ, बताओ.
मतलब जैसे कि अभी ये 4 जो पुराने वाला, जैसे ये 6 से पहले वाला था ना, ये 4 जो आप अभी इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, और जो पाइथन के जैसा सेम जैसे फॉर ऑफ लूप.
हाँ, करेक्ट.
हाँ, फॉर ऑफ लूप, एंड देन और एक है फॉर इन लूप. तो मैं आज एक कर रहा था तो मुझे पता चला फॉर इन लूप में हमें इंडेक्स नंबर मिल जाता है.
हाँ, तो अगर तुम फॉर इन लूप अगर तुम एरे में यूज करते हो तो तब मिलता है.
ओके. और फॉर ऑफ लूप जो पाइथन में जैसे हम करते तो वैसे कर सकते हैं. और जो ये फॉर लूप है, मतलब पाइथन में जैसे हम कभी-कभी कोई भी कोड करने के लिए हम रेंज का इस्तेमाल करते हैं, रेंज फंक्शन का. तो इधर रेंज नहीं है तो इधर हम जो नॉर्मल फॉर लूप है वो इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, कुछ भी कंडीशन लगा के.
दैट इज करेक्ट. वही बोल रहा था. तो जावास्क्रिप्ट में ना यू हैव 4 काइंड्स ऑफ लूप्स. तो अभी तक हमने सिर्फ 3 तरीके देखे हैं, which is this normal for loop, we have also looked at the for off and for in, लेकिन एक और लूप भी है जो हम बाद में देखते हैं.
Okay.
लेकिन क्या कब इस्तेमाल करना है? वेरी सिंपल. I'll just tell you very simply. If you have to loop through an array, अगर आपके पास एक array है और आपको सिर्फ उसका लूप करना है, then just use a for off loop. Because for off loop में क्या है कि वो automatically it starts from the first index and it stops at the last index without you telling it explicitly anything. वो directly वो काम कर लेता है ऐसा. But let's say you have an object that you want to loop through. Then use the for in loop. What the for in loop will do is it will just loop over the keys of the object. Okay? But if you do not have an array or you do not have an object, then use this for loop. This can be used for many other things. So you can use this for arrays also, but use this only if you do not have an array or object to loop through. You have to loop through something else. अगर आपके पास एक number, static number है ऐसा, तब you can use this for loop.
Okay, sir.
Okay, ना? Yeah. ठीक है. So shall we continue with one more topic or shall I stop? अभी 10 मिनट और है. आप बताओ, you want to continue or shall we stop it here? You guys want an assignment?
Stop it, sir.
ठीक है. असाइनमेंट के बारे में सोचता हूँ. एक्चुअली गाइस अभी तक जो भी हमने किया ना उसका असाइनमेंट तो अभी मेरे पास नहीं है, बट आई विल थिंक ऑफ समथिंग टुमारो एंड टेल यू. ओके?
Okay, sir.
आई मीन ऑन संडे, सॉरी. ठीक है. Okay guys, I'll see you on Sunday then if you have no more questions for me.
No, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye. Good night.